Welcome to the Audio Architect Custom Panel Tips and Tricks video tutorial. In another video, we created a fairly simple panel offering control over source selection and volume for two rooms. In this video, we'll use the same panel as our starting point to look at some other custom panel features made available to us. We'll look at how control images can be changed and how panel presets can be created and recalled. We'll also look at utilizing system functions for creating a practical user interface that can be used while restricting access to the majority of Audio Architect. First off, if we're jumping back into a design, in order to make edits to a custom panel, remember we can right-click on the panel and select Edit. Now that we're back in the panel to make edits, as merely a preference, let's first turn our borders back on. Next, let's consider swapping out the control images. As we start to enlarge some of our controls, we'll find that images are of a low resolution quality. We can easily swap these images out. You may already have a library of control images you wish to reference, but in case you don't, you can find a free library in several formats available at the following link. That's what we'll be using today. Starting with the fader properties, let's select the fader cap. We then find the fader cap image button. Let's click here, and we'll see some stock fader cap images. Click on Browse, and we can navigate to our custom controls library to find there are fader caps in a couple different varieties for both vertical and horizontal orientation. Let's use the dark gray dog bone. After selecting it, we'll find the image is rather large. A quick test will reveal it is, however, still useful. We can easily scale this down using the fader cap size option. Let's dial it down to 30 by 70. That's 30, 70. We can then use the vertices surrounding the fader cap to further resize if desired. Next, let's change the mute button images. Select the button and navigate to the button properties. Since this is a binary control, we have two different images to consider. Click on the on indication, and here we'll find the backing image option. Click Select, and we'll navigate to our custom controls library if we're not there already. Just like the faders, we have several different options. Let's select the short red rectangle. For the off indication, let's select the short black rectangle. We can copy and paste the visual properties of the controls from room 1 onto room 2. Simply right-click on a control like the fader and select Copy Visual Properties. Enable the desired properties, and then right-click on the other fader and select Paste Visual Properties. After copying and pasting visual properties, we may find we need to realign controls. We can further customize the appearance by changing the selected item color in the list box. Select it, navigate to the list box properties, and click on the selected item color button. Maybe we're going for a sort of monochromatic palette, and we'll select dark gray. This particular control type does not copy and paste over the selected item color, so we'll need to change this independently for both. Maybe we want to stylize the panel within the panel. We can select it, and then go to its appearance properties. For the paint style, maybe we want to use a gradient brush. Next, we'll select vertical for the gradient mode, and let's change the gradient color start. Let's blend it in with the rest of the background, so we'll choose 40-40-40 for the RGB value. If we have trouble remembering what the background color is, we can always double check it in the panel properties under Appearance. Let's launch the panel to verify we are happy with everything and that it still functions as intended. Next, let's take a look at creating panel presets for this panel. First off, what is a panel preset? A panel preset is a snapshot of all parameter values on a single panel. Unlike parameter presets, which live on a BSS SoundWeb device, panel presets live within the Audio Architect venue file, and therefore they can only be recalled through Audio Architect. Panel presets can be created and deleted while online or offline in a couple different ways. We can either add to the panel a basic control option called the panel preset bar, or we can right-click on the Windows header to expose the panel preset options. We can also left-click on the control icon in the Windows header to reveal the panel preset options. Take, for example, both our mutes are on and our source selectors are set to none. We can consider this our default room mute preset. Click on Store Preset, give it a unique name like Mute Rooms, and click OK. Next, we can unmute the rooms. In the source selector, we can select PC for each, and we'll set our faders to -10 dB. Note that it would be more appropriate to be online with the design to determine an appropriate level. Right-click on the Windows header, select Store, and give Preset 2 a unique name like Unmute Rooms. Whether using a panel preset bar or by right-clicking on the Windows header, we can delete panel presets and we can also recall the panel presets. Let's recall each one to verify they are working as intended. There are several methods for recalling a panel preset within Audio Architect. To demonstrate one of those ways, let's actually create a second panel. The guidelines for this panel are that it will serve as a welcome screen, allow the end user to easily recall one of the two presets we just created, allow the end user to access the basic room controls panel, and ultimately allow the user to log out. Since our first panel has some of the building blocks we may want to reuse, why don't we go ahead and duplicate it? Let's rename it to Welcome, and remember we can rename it by either right-clicking on the panel within the panel section of the offline or online design ribbon, or we can rename it from the design properties in the custom panel designer. Next, let's remove the parts we don't need, like the Room 2 panel, then the Room 1 controls, though we'll keep the panel and text label. Let's edit the label to read Welcome. Now, to make it possible to recall the two panel presets we recently created, we are going to use what are called system functions. There are 3 buttons that support system functions. Those buttons are Button, Button Region, and Button System Functions. Let's insert a button. Next, let's enter the button properties and give it some text to represent what it will do. Let's type Unmute Rooms. Next, let's go to its system function properties and click on the button to assign at least one system function. The list on the left displays all system functions that will be executed when the button is pressed, in order starting with the first position. The drop-down on the right displays all available system functions that are available. For our purposes, let's select Recall Panel Preset, select the Basic Room Controls panel, and lastly, select the preset Unmute Rooms. Then click OK. We can then control-drag this button and make edits appropriate for the Mute Rooms preset. After making the necessary changes, let's go ahead and test it. While we don't require the Basic Room Controls panel to be active to recall the presets from the Welcome panel, let's go ahead and activate it so we can at least visually confirm that the correct presets are being recalled. Great. Let's move back to editing our Welcome panel. Let's add 2 more buttons. One that will allow us to activate the Basic Room Controls panel from the Welcome panel, and a second that will allow us to log out. For the first button, let's give it the appropriate text, Basic Room Controls. Next, we'll assign 2 system functions. The first will be to close the current panel. We'll then click on Add and select Launch Custom Panel and specify Basic Room Controls. Take note that the use of the arrow keys can always reorder system functions if needed. For the second button, we'll label it Log Out. In its system function, we'll select Log Out and click OK. Lastly, it would probably be wise to place a button on the Basic Room Controls panel that will allow us to go back to the Welcome screen. If you haven't guessed, we'll use System Function. We can copy the Basic Room Controls button we just created and jump over to edit the Basic Room Controls panel. Let's adjust the panel size if needed to add a button, and then let's paste it in. When we paste the button, it will automatically be placed into the center of the panel. Let's go ahead and move it out of the way. Now all we need to do is give it the appropriate text, like Back to Welcome, and edit the system functions so that it instead launches the Welcome panel. Alright, let's test this out. Launch the Welcome panel, and since we've already tested the presets, let's just verify that when we click on the Basic Room Controls, that the panel launches appropriately. Great! Now let's verify that the Back to Welcome button works. Awesome! We won't be able to test the logout button until we enable access control, and we'll cover that in another video. While this concludes our look at custom panel tips and tricks, it does not conclude what all can be accomplished through custom panels. Set up a test file, have fun experimenting, and thank you for watching.